I never thought I'd be the kind of person to get involved in something like this, especially not at work. But when you're spending long hours in the hospital, surrounded by life and death, emotions can run high, and lines can blur. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how I found myself tangled in a forbidden attraction with Dr. James Carter, my attending physician. I'm a first-year medical intern at St. Luke's Medical Center, a sprawling urban hospital where the days are chaotic and the nights are eerily still. I'd worked my whole life to get here. Years of late-night studying, endless exams, and a stubborn determination to prove I belonged. I wasn't about to let anything derail me. The hospital was my proving ground. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the sharp scent of antiseptic lingering in the air, and the distant echo of monitors keeping time like a heartbeat. Dr. James Carter was the attending physician on my rotation. He was in his late 30s, a brilliant surgeon with a reputation that preceded him. Tall, with sharp features and piercing, blue eyes. He had this calm, unshakable presence that made even the most frantic emergencies feel manageable. I'd watch him in the operating room, his hands steady as he worked, and think, that's who I want to be someday. But it wasn't just his skill that got under my skin. It was the little things, the way he'd catch my eye during rounds, and nod approvingly, or how his voice softened when he said my name, Emily, like it was something special. One night, after a brutal 16-hour shift, I was in the residence lounge, hunched over a stack of patient charts. The room was quiet, just the hum of the vending machine and the faint murmur of a TV nobody was watching. I was running on fumes, sipping lukewarm coffee that tasted like regret, when Dr. Carter walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his white coat unbuttoned, revealing a dress shirt that was slightly wrinkled from the day. Emily, he said finally, his voice low and smooth. You're still here? You should rest. I looked up, startled, and managed a tired smile. Just finishing some charts, Dr. Carter. I'll sleep when they're done. He chuckled, a sound that felt too warm for the sterile room, and sat, down beside me, closer than he needed to. You're relentless. That's a good quality in a doctor, but don't burn out on me. He leaned in to look at the chart I was working on, and I caught the faint scent of his cologne. Something subtle, woody, intoxicating. Our shoulders brushed, and a jolt shot through me, sharp and unexpected. I told myself it was nothing, just exhaustion playing tricks, but my pulse didn't agree. This is solid work, he said after a moment, his eyes scanning my notes. Thorough, smart. You've got a knack for this. Thanks, Dr. Carter, I murmured, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He turned his head and suddenly his face was inches from mine. You know, Emily, I think you could be exceptional, with the right guidance. His hand brushed mine as he reached for another chart, and I froze. Was it an accident? Or did he linger there, just for a heartbeat longer than necessary? The air between us felt charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. Before I could figure it out, the door swung open, and Sarah, one of the other interns, stepped inside. She stopped short, her sharp brown eyes flicking between us. Am I interrupting something? She asked, her tone edged with suspicion. Dr. Carter pulled back smoothly, standing up. Not at all. Just reviewing cases. He grabbed a chart and headed for the door. Good night, ladies. Sarah watched him. Go. Then turned to me, crossing her arms. What was that? Nothing, I said too quickly. He was just helping with charts. She smirked, unconvinced. Sure. Just watch yourself, Emily. You know the rules. Attendings and interns don't mix. And Carter, he's got a reputation since his divorce. Divorce? I echoed, trying to sound casual. Yeah. Finalized last month. Nurses won't shut up about it. Say he's been a mess, staying late all the time. She shrugged. Not your problem, though, unless you make it one. Her words stuck with me the next day as I moved through my rounds. I'd overheard snippets in the locker room later. 2 nurses gossiping about how Dr. Carter's ex-wife had left him reeling, how he'd thrown himself into work to cope. It made sense, that flicker of sadness I'd seen in him sometimes. But it also made this, whatever this was, feel even more dangerous. That night, as I was packing up to leave, I found a note tucked into my locker. His handwriting was unmistakable. Meet me in the on-call room after your shift tomorrow. We need to talk. My stomach flipped. Was it about work or something else? I knew I should crumple it up, walk away, but I didn't. The next shift dragged by, every hour thick with anticipation. When it finally ended, I headed to the on-call room, my heart hammering. It was a small space, dimly lit, with a narrow bed and a desk shoved against the wall. Dr. Carter was already there, sitting on the bed's edge, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, standing as I shut the door. "Thanks for coming." "What's this about, Dr. Carter?" I asked, leaning against the door, my voice unsteady. He stepped closer. "Call me James when we're alone." "James," I said, and it felt like crossing a line just to say it. "I know this is wrong," he began, his voice tight. "I could lose everything if anyone finds out, but I can't stop thinking about you." My breath hitched. "James, you don't have to say anything," he cut in, taking my hand. His touch was warm, firm, and it sent a shiver up my spine. "I just needed you to know." And then, footsteps. Loud, quick, right outside. The doorknob rattled, and we jumped apart, my heart slamming against my ribs. Someone was coming in. If you've ever been caught in a moment you couldn't explain, you might get why I couldn't breathe right then. Stick around. I've got more to confess. The door to the on-call room swung open, and I jolted back, my heart slamming against my ribcage. James, Dr. Carter, stepped away from me in one fluid motion, his expression shifting to practiced calm. It was just a janitor, wheeling in a mop bucket, his headphones blaring loud enough to drown out any suspicion. He nodded politely and started, wiping the floor, oblivious to the electric current still crackling between us. I exhaled shakily, my fingers trembling as I adjusted my stethoscope. James caught my eye, his gaze a silent warning. That was too close. He cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the tension. "Well, Emily, I think we've covered everything for now. Get some rest." "Yes, Dr. Carter," I managed, forcing my tone to match his professionalism. I grabbed my bag and slipped out, avoiding the weight of his stare. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, dimly lit and silent, but my mind was a storm. His hand on mine. The way he said my name. I pressed a palm to my chest, willing my pulse to slow. This is dangerous. I need to stop. But I didn't stop. Over the next few days, I couldn't. Every time James passed me in the bustling hospital corridors, our eyes locked. A fleeting, forbidden connection that sent heat racing through me. During rounds, his voice seemed to linger on my name, low and deliberate, and I caught myself leaning into his words, memorizing the cadence. It was reckless, and I knew it. Then came the night that changed everything. We'd been assigned to a grueling case, a patient with complications that dragged us into the OR for hours. By the time we scrubbed out, it was past midnight, the hospital, hushed and hollow. My body ached, but my mind buzzed, replaying every glance James had thrown my way during surgery. I shuffled into the doctor's lounge for coffee, and there he was, leaning against the counter, a mug in hand. His white coat was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, and when he looked up, A faint smile curved his lips. "Emily," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Another late night?" "Yeah," I replied, pouring coffee with unsteady hands. "That surgery was intense." He nodded, his eyes tracing me. "You handled it well. You're a natural in there." Pride flared in my chest, warm and dangerous. "Thanks. I learned from the best." He chuckled, and we slipped into talking about the case. Safe, neutral ground. But the air thickened as we spoke. Our gazes kept colliding, and I noticed how his lingered on my lips, how mine drifted to the shadow of stubble on his jaw. "James," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "About the other night." He set his mug down and stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the faint cedar of his cologne. "I know. It was reckless. But I meant what I said." My breath hitched. "So did I, but we can't—" "I know," he cut in, his face tightening with conflict. "Believe me, I know the risks. But when I'm with you, it's like everything else just fades." I swallowed hard, my resolve fraying. "Me too. But if anyone finds out—" He reached out, his fingers brushing mine, a spark igniting where we touched. "We'll be careful. I promise." My pager buzzed, slicing through the moment like a scalpel. A routine call from the nurse's station. I sighed, stepping back. "I have to go." "Go," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We'll talk later." I left the lounge, my mind a tangle of guilt and longing. I was playing with fire, and I couldn't seem to care. The next day, Sarah cornered me in the locker room. "Emily, we need to talk." I glanced up from tying my scrubs, her crossed arms and narrowed eyes setting me on edge. "What's up?" "I've noticed you and Dr. Carter spending a lot of time together," she said, her tone sharp. "People are starting to talk." My stomach plummeted. "What do you mean?" "Rumors are flying. Some say you're his favorite, others think there's more to it." "Just be careful, okay? You don't want a reputation." I forced a laugh, thin and unconvincing. "There's nothing going on, Sarah. We're just colleagues." She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "If you say so. But this is a small hospital. Secrets don't stay secret for long." Her warning echoed in my head all day. I tried to keep my distance from James, sticking to crowded rooms and clipped responses, but it was like fighting gravity. Every time he was near, I was pulled back in. That night, as I grabbed my coat to leave, I found a note slipped into my locker. "Meet me in my office at 11 p.m. It's important." His handwriting, bold and unmistakable. My heart thudded. I should have torn it up, walked away. Instead, I tucked it into my pocket. At 11, the hospital was a ghost town, the silence amplifying every creak of the floor. I knocked softly on his office door, and he opened it, ushering me inside. The room was dim, lit only by his desk lamp, shadows stretching across the walls. "Emily," he said, closing the door with a quiet click. "Thanks for coming." "What's this about?" I asked, my voice wavering despite my effort to sound steady. He took a deep breath, his eyes searching mine. "I can't stop thinking about you. And I know it's wrong, but I need to know if you feel the same." My resolve shattered. "James, Before I could finish, he stepped forward, his hand cupping my cheek. "Tell me to stop and I will." But I didn't. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut, and then his lips were on mine, soft, insistent, electric. The kiss burned through me, a rush of heat and need I couldn't suppress. We broke apart, breathless, the air between us humming. "We shouldn't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know," he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. But I can't help it. A sharp knock on the door froze us in place. "Dr. Carter?" Sarah's voice, laced with suspicion. Panic surged through me. How did she know I was here? James squeezed my hand, his whisper urgent. "Hide." He pointed to the small closet behind his desk. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut just as he opened the office door. "Sarah, what can I do for you?" His tone was smooth, unruffled. "I was looking for Emily," she said, her words edged with doubt. "I thought I saw her come this way." "Emily?" James replied, casual as ever. "I haven't seen her. Maybe she went home." A pause stretched, heavy and tense. "Maybe. Sorry to bother you, Dr. Carter." "Not a problem. Good night, Sarah." The door clicked shut, and I exhaled, my heart still hammering. James opened the closet, his face grim. That was too close. I nodded, stepping out on shaky legs. "What are we going to do?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but we need to figure this out before it blows up in our faces." I left his office that night, the taste of his kiss still on my lips, the weight of Sarah's suspicion pressing down on me. We were teetering on the edge of disaster, and I couldn't bring myself to step back. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. The days after our close call with Dr. Miller blurred into a haze of stolen glances and whispered conversations. James and I were walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of something beautiful and catastrophic. I told myself we were being careful, but deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth clawed its way out. It started with Sarah. I was in the locker room, changing out of my scrubs after another grueling shift, when she cornered me. Her arms were crossed, her eyes sharp as scalpels. "Emily, we need to talk," she said, her voice low but firm. I sighed, tugging on my sweater. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No, it can't." She stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder to make sure we were alone. "I know about you and Dr. Carter." My heart plummeted. "Sarah, there's nothing—" "Don't," she snapped, cutting me off. "Don't lie to me. I saw you leaving his office late at night, and the way he looks at you during rounds, it's obvious." Panic surged through me, cold and relentless. "Please, you can't tell anyone." "So there is something to tell," she said, her tone triumphant but tinged with concern. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "It's complicated, but yes, there's something." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Look, Emily, I'm not here to ruin your life, but this is a hospital, not a soap opera. If this gets out, it could destroy your career, and his." "I know," I whispered, guilt gnawing at me. "We're trying to be careful." "You need to do more than try," she warned. "End it before it's too late." Her words echoed in my head as I left the locker room, but they couldn't drown out the pull I felt toward James. That night, we were both assigned to a high-stakes case, a patient with a ruptured aneurysm. The surgery was intense, the kind that left your hands shaking and your mind buzzing long after it was over. By the time we scrubbed out, it was past midnight, and the hospital was a ghost town. I found myself in the on-call room, staring blankly at the wall, when James slipped inside. He shut the door quietly, his eyes locking onto mine. "Emily," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk." I nodded, my pulse quickening. "Sarah knows." She confronted me. His face tightened. "What did you tell her?" "That there's nothing going on." But she didn't believe me. She said we need to end this. He stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm. "Maybe she's right. Maybe we should stop before it's too late." But even as he said it, his fingers lingered on my skin, sending sparks through me. "James, I don't know if I can." His gaze darkened, and he pulled me into his arms. Neither do I. Our lips met in a kiss that was desperate, hungry, as if we were trying to memorize each other before the world tore us apart. For a moment, everything else faded: the hospital, the risks, the consequences. It was just us, tangled in a web of longing and fear. Then, the door burst open. We sprang apart, but it was too late. Dr. Miller, the chief of surgery, stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he bellowed. My heart stopped. James stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Dr. Miller, it's not what it looks like." "Save it," Dr. Miller growled, his eyes blazing. "Both of you, in my office, now." As we followed him down the hallway, my mind raced. This was it. The moment I'd dreaded. My career, my reputation, everything I'd worked for was about to crumble. But just as we reached his office, the hospital's alarm system blared to life. Code blue, room 204. Code blue, room 204. Dr. Miller cursed under his breath. "We'll deal with this later. Go." James and I sprinted to the patient's room, our personal drama swallowed by the urgency of saving a life. As we worked together, his hands steady, mine trembling but focused, I realized how seamlessly we moved, like two halves of a whole. Our connection wasn't just physical. It was professional, emotional, undeniable. But even as we stabilized the patient, I knew the storm wasn't over. Dr. Miller wouldn't forget what he'd seen, and Sarah's warning still loomed. The walls were closing in. Later, as the adrenaline ebbed, James pulled me into an empty hallway. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you." I looked up at him, my chest tight. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I'm being considered for head of the department. But if this gets out, it could ruin everything, for both of us." His words hit like a punch. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we should stop seeing each other. For both our sakes." Tears stung my eyes. "Is that what you want?" He looked away, his jaw clenched. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's best." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I understand." But as I walked away, my heart splintered. I knew he was right. But every step felt like a betrayal of everything I felt. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Can we talk? Meet me at the park near the hospital." Against my better judgment, I went. He was waiting on a bench, his face shadowed under the street lamp. "Emily, I couldn't let things end like that." "James, we can't keep doing this," I said, my voice breaking. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about us." He took my hand, his touch warm and familiar. "I don't want to lose you." Before I could respond, a car pulled up nearby, its headlights slicing through the darkness. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, James's ex-wife, her face twisted with anger. "James, what the hell is this?" she shouted, storming toward us. My blood turned to ice. This is it, I thought. The moment everything falls apart. The night air hung thick with tension as Laura, James's ex-wife, stormed toward us across the dimly lit park. Her face was a mask of fury, her eyes blazing with accusation as they darted between us. "James, what the hell is this?" she shouted, gesturing wildly at me. "Is this why you were so eager to sign those divorce papers?" James stepped in, front of me, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Laura, this isn't the time or place. Emily and I are colleagues, and..." "Colleagues?" Laura cut him off with a bitter laugh. "Don't insult my intelligence. I saw the way you were looking at her. It's obvious what's going on." My cheeks burned with a mix of shame and anger. "Laura, please, it's not what you think." I tried to interject, but she ignored me, her gaze locked on James like a predator sizing up its prey. "You think you can just move on and pretend our marriage meant nothing?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "And with an intern, no less. Do you have any idea how this looks?" James's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his stubble. "Laura, our marriage is over. You made that clear when you left. What I do now is none of your business." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her tone stayed razor sharp. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face. And it will, James. Secrets like this don't stay hidden in a hospital." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, the slam of the door echoing through the quiet night. I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling at my sides. "James, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." He turned to me, his expression softening despite the frustration lingering in his eyes. "It's not your fault, Emily. Laura's she's still hurting, but she's right about one thing. We can't keep hiding this." Before I could respond, our pagers buzzed in unison, the shrill sound slicing through the charged silence. We exchanged a glance. Another emergency. Without a word, we hurried back to the hospital, the weight of our unfinished conversation pressing down on us like a storm cloud. In the operating room, we scrubbed in side by side, the sterile hum of the hospital drowning out the chaos in my mind. The surgery was a grueling affair. A patient with a ruptured aneurysm, every second a battle against time. James and I moved in perfect sync, our hands brushing as we passed instruments, each fleeting touch a silent reminder of the bond we couldn't escape. His steady voice guided the team, while I anticipated his every move, our connection as seamless as it was forbidden. When it was over, and the patient's vitals stabilized, a wave of relief washed over me. We'd done it, together. But as we stepped out of the OR, stripping off our gloves, that relief evaporated. Dr. Miller, the chief of surgery, stood waiting, his arms crossed and his face carved from stone. "Dr. Carter, Dr. Thompson, my office. Now!" My stomach plummeted. This was it, the reckoning we'd been dreading. Inside Dr. Miller's office, the air felt suffocating. He didn't mince words. "I've heard rumors about the two of you, and after what I've seen, I can't ignore them any longer. This kind of behavior is unacceptable in a professional setting." James squared his shoulders, his voice unwavering. "Dr. Miller, I take full responsibility. Emily is an exceptional doctor, and I don't want her career to suffer because of my actions." I shook my head, stepping forward despite the knot in my throat. "No, James. We're both responsible. We knew the risks, and we chose to ignore them." Dr. Miller sighed, rubbing his temples as if warding off a headache. "Look, I get it. Emotions run high in this line of work. But you have to maintain boundaries. Your relationship could compromise patient care and the integrity of this hospital." Paused, his gaze shifting between us, assessing. "However, I also saw how you worked together in that surgery. Your teamwork was impeccable, and it's clear you both care deeply about your patients." A flicker of hope sparked in my chest as James and I exchanged a glance. "So, I'm willing to give you a chance to make this right," Dr. Miller continued. "I'll reassign Emily to a different attending, and you both need to promise to keep your personal lives out of the hospital. If I hear even a whisper of impropriety, there will be consequences." Relief flooded through me, loosening the vice around my lungs. "Thank you, Dr. Miller. We won't let you down." James nodded, his tone resolute. "We appreciate your understanding." As we left his office, James guided me into a quiet corner of the hallway, his hand lingering on my arm. His eyes searched mine, a storm of emotion swirling in their depths. "Emily, I know this isn't going to be easy, but I believe in us. You're worth every risk." I took his hand, squeezing it gently, the warmth of his skin grounding me. "And you're worth fighting for, James. We'll make this work. No matter what." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with my own. "One day at a time," he whispered, his voice a promise. In that moment, surrounded by the steady hum of the hospital, I felt a fragile peace settle over me. Our love was a delicate thing, forged in stolen glances and whispered confessions, but it was real. And now, with the shadows lifted, we could finally step into the light together. As I walked out of the hospital that night, the stars glittered above like a map of possibilities. I thought back to my first day as an intern, how determined I'd been to prove myself, how naive I'd been about the tangled dance of love and work. This journey had tested me in ways I never imagined, pushing me to the edge of my resolve. But it had also shown me what truly mattered. With James by my side, I knew there would be obstacles ahead, rumors to silence, boundaries to honor, but I felt ready to face them. Our story wasn't over, it was just beginning.